Good morning and welcome. This is Robert Ricks from the National Weather Service office in Slidell, Louisiana. And today this is the last day of the calendar year 2019. And as is typical customary at this time of the year, everybody likes to reflect back on the past before we move into the future. And with this, we're going to do a review of the past decade, because we are ending also a decade of the 20-teens, and it was memorable decade as far as weather events go in our area. So what we're going to do is an overview of some of the more significant weather events. This is not all inclusive. Of course, some things were left out, but these are some of the more notable, bigger events that we've had over our past decade in the New Orleans, Baton Rouge service area. Now, our service area encompasses all of southeast Louisiana, east of the Atchafalaya River. That's 22 parishes. And then we also have 8 counties in Mississippi, the 4 just above that, Walthall, Emmett, Pike, and Wilkinson counties. And then we also have the 4 on the Gulf Coast, Pearl River, Hancock, Harrison, and Jackson counties. We also extend into the Gulf of Mexico 60 to 70 miles out for our marine area. So it's a rather large area. And a lot of these events were inclusive to us. Some of them also affected other parts of the country as they moved through or out of our area, probably more notable and significant than even what we had. But suffice it to say, we're trying to limit our focus to what happened in our service area only. So let's go on through this and see what we had. Looking at tropical weather, we did have, stand by a second, I'm having a little bit of a difficulty here. Okay. All right, so let's just continue moving on. Okay, so tropical cyclones during this decade, we did have 6 that moved into or through our area or directly had some impacts in our area. And this would include the remnants of Tropical Storm Bonnie, which happened in 2010. And a lot of people may not remember that one, but we'll look into why it was significant for us, at least in the Weather Service. And then Tropical Storm Lee moved through in 2011, September, around Labor Day weekend. And then we had Hurricane Isaac. That was perhaps the biggest event that we had tropically related in our service area, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then it took a little bit of a hiatus for the tropical impacts until 2017, and we had Hurricane Nate that hit the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and Tropical Storm Gordon eventually, and then Hurricane Barry to close out this year. So let's look at each of those individually real quick. And 2010, again, Tropical Storm Bonnie. A lot of people may not remember that one because we were deep in the throes of dealing with Deepwater Horizon, the explosion of the rig ultimately, and then the oil spill, the massive oil spill that took place, and the recovery efforts that went on for several months during the year of 2010, from April through the end of the year. And during that time, in July, we did have Tropical Storm Bonnie come out of the Atlantic across the lower Florida Peninsula. And then as it approached the oil slick area, it somehow just dissipated into really nothing, just a remnant low as it moved into Louisiana. But it did have some impacts in that, in dealing with the oil spill, it did bring some concerns on what this tropical impact might have in dealing with this new consequence that we had out there ongoing at the time. So it did shut down operations, the recovery and cleanup efforts for a day or two for safety reasons. And so that's why it's significant. And of course, the oil spill itself was the big story nonetheless. And then moving on to the next one, Tropical Storm Lee, which formed in September. It formed in the Gulf and moved up our way. It actually made landfall in Lake Charles' service area over in the Atchafalaya Basin area, but its impacts was the significant heavy rainfall that set up with it over our area, and that showed some amounts of like over 15 inches in Holden, Louisiana, which is in Livingston Parish. And so you can see it was quite an extensive rain event for not only us, but it extended all the way through the Tennessee Valley and on up into the northeast United States, New England states eventually. So it was a big rain event for several days, for well over a week as it crossed the country. Now, moving on to Hurricane Isaac, that was perhaps the biggest tropical event that we had during the decade. and that its impacts were well felt over the Louisiana area. We had some significant surge flooding from Lake Pontchartrain that got into the Laplace area, and those communities surrounding Lake Pontchartrain were particularly hard hit as far as the surge goes. There was some wind damage throughout the area as well, but the overarching big impact from this event was the storm surge that was generated from Isaac along the Gulf Coast and particularly in the Lake Pontchartrain system. Several levees were overtopped, and I'm not going to read the text, but you can, feel free to read this at your own leisure because this link is available on our website. Just click on it at any time and review this at your leisure. And it's all available and ready to go. And there's also some embedded links from additional information on a lot of these pages as well, so feel free to peruse that as well. Moving on to 2017, we had a little bit of a 5-year hiatus from tropical impacts, and then we get to Hurricane Nate that made landfall on the Mississippi Gulf Coast near Biloxi. And it was somewhat of a minor impact event, but we did have some storm surge that did impact the beach, some beach erosion along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and some low level impacts as far as storm surge goes and inundation in the coastal areas. And for the most part, those inundation readings ranged anywhere from about 2 feet on up to as high as about 6.2 feet, which was measured over there in Jackson County, Mississippi, near Pascagoula. And then on the side, you can see we have a graphic here. This is from the United States Geological Survey, their Water Resources Division, and they have storm tide gauges along the coast in some places, and one of them happens to be at Ship Island, which is in the Mississippi Sound. And here you can see a storm surge that peaked out around 9 feet at Mississippi Lighthouse, Mississippi Sound east part of Ship Island, and so that was one of the more significant readings that we did have from this event. And then we get to Tropical Storm Gordon, and its biggest thing was some impacts, some minor impacts once again to the Mississippi Gulf Coast, because it was in a weakening stage as it was making landfall, but there was quite a bit of angst and leading up to this storm moving into our area, as you can see. And we had just newly promoted our MIC, who was Mr. Ken Graham. He went to become the director at the Hurricane Center, and this is one of his first events that he worked as director. And here he is shown briefing the nation on the impacts of Gordon as it's approaching the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So this is a tribute to him as being our MIC for the past decade, during much of the decade. He started here in 2008 as the MIC, and he ended his reign in April of 2018. So in there you got some history of all the former NHC directors as well, so feel free to click that link and read more about that. And then finally we get Hurricane Barry, which happened this year, and this was quite a dubious way of getting a tropical system. We started out with what we call a mesocyclone convective system, an MCS, that started out as an upward disturbance over, believe it or not, of all places, Elkhart, Kansas, which is an extreme southwest corner of Kansas. That's where its origins was based, and it circled all the way through basically the Atlanta, Georgia area over several days before it finally emerged into the Gulf. And then it took on tropical characteristics and became Barry, and then moved into our area and produced some rainfall and some minor surge efforts. But the main key thing on this was that the modeling, the numerical models that we use on a daily basis, actually latched on this in the early stages of it being a MCS and eventually translating over to a tropical system. So that was well handled in the model domain, and it gave us quite a bit of confidence on dealing with it moving forward. The bigger challenge, though, however, was Bonnet Carré was being utilized because the Mississippi River was at high flows. And this was the first tropical event ever in the history of the spillway, which opened in 1929. This is the first time ever that it was utilized during a tropical event. So that's kind of monumental in that regard. So let's move on to tornado events now, and then we have an interactive map here just to show you this functionality here. As you zoom in on the map, you would actually can click on the dots, and that's where storm damage was noted. These were some of the most significant tornado events that we've had in our area since 2010. And if you click on a dot, you can actually open up a little pop-up, and it'll give you all the information regarding the damage at that particular location. So that's a nice feature to have. And the ones we're going to highlight on is Ash Wednesday, the Kenner tornado in 2011, Christmas Day outbreak, which was pretty significant in 2012, April 27th outbreak in 2015. Then we had 2016, we had February 23rd, we had some tornadoes on that day. Of course, everybody seems to remember the New Orleans East tornado. It hit Michoud eventually. That was a rather large monumental event for New Orleans area. And then we also had some more severe weather and tornadoes that occurred this year. So we'll review those real quickly. The ones that you see here on the side is from the Ash Wednesday tornado as seen from the radar that's located near the New Orleans International Airport in Gramercy. And you can see in the presentation there the typical hook echo nature of the cell, and it went on to produce a tornado that ultimately hit in the Loyola Avenue area of Kenner near the airport. Moving on through Christmas Day 2012, this was in Pearl River County and the McNeil community, which is in the central part of Pearl River County. And then as we did survey it and realized that it was EF3 tornado damage, pretty significant strength damaging tornado. Through there you can see homes and trees denuded and homes destroyed, and people were greatly impacted by this, as typically is the case with tornadoes. And you can click on the link and get all the details on that event as well. So just to show you what a link looks like, it goes straight to our webpage. All this is available, but you'll get the whole details of the survey and some other information from the radar and some damage pictures as well whenever you click on any one of these. So that's available to you from the page as well. So continuing on, then we go to April 27th, and we had some severe weather come through the area, but what got a lot of the media attention was the train derailment that took place on the Huey P. Long Bridge. A big gust of winds from an outflow squall line, if you will. We're estimating on an order of, say, 70 to 80 miles an hour. The train was moving typically slow as it does on that span, about 5 miles an hour, and the wind caught it in just the right way and derailed the train off the bridge span, and luckily harmlessly down to the ground where no one was below. It did take out quite a bit of power lines, and there was significant power outages across the Metairie area, well, Harahan and those areas near the Huey P. Long Bridge because of this. And so it took several days for the train company and the emergency management to get this cleaned up. But that was one of the greater, say, newsworthy episodes we had on that event. Moving on to 2016, February 3rd, we had some tornadoes that affected the Pankerville and to Convent area, and these were EF3 rated as well. For our area, that's kind of significant because we typically get the lower end weaker ones, say EF0, EF1, quite frequently. So EF3 around here is a big deal. And that was the case. Unfortunately, 2 people did lose their lives on this particular event, and we had 75 injuries as well. And also noteworthy is we had another large tornado, what we call a wedge. It was seen on camera and viewed by motorists and whatnot on I-55 heading towards Madisonville area. And it almost warranted having a tornado emergency posted for Madisonville, but fortunately it lifted up just prior to getting to Madisonville. But it was a rather large and dangerous tornado. So that was one of the big issues that we were dealing with that day. Then we get to 2017, February 7th. This is the New Orleans East tornado, and you can see the typical classic hook echo appearance. This is around the I-310 area, or I-110 area going into Chalmette, and it's crossing there around the Michoud Boulevard area, and this is heading right directly for the Michoud plant. And then in the pictures on the left, you can see some of the damage on the Michoud facility, some buildings that were significantly damaged. This building, by the way, houses the National Finance Center. They're the ones that pay our salaries and whatnot. They cut the checks on behalf of the agency, and that's centrally located here in New Orleans at the Michoud facility. And they were greatly impacted by this event. They had to relocate and do some other backup continuity of operations for several months until they could get back in-house there. And you can also see there was some train derailments and some other damages throughout the area, because this hit a heavily populated area, the Robin Hood subdivision and some of those other subdivisions around Chef Mentor. And then moving into 2019, this year, we did have a couple of notable events. We had a total of 8 tornadoes that affected the Sorrento area. One was an EF2. That's the one that hit Sorrento. That's the long track purple one that you see there. And then one north of Gonzales that went on through Port Vincent area. And then so we had 6 other ones that were rated EF1, and then we had a little weaker one near Pankerville, which was EF0 rated. And then we also, and then Christmas Day, we also, I'm sorry, in December, we also had another event, which is not highlighted here, but it's mentioned nonetheless because it did recently happen. Okay, so floods, moving into floods, of course, we had 3 big events that on any given year would be the big news story. The March 11th, that probably would have been the largest event we would have had in our area had it not been for what happened in August of 2016. But the March 10th, 11th event in the North Shore, Washington and St. Tammany parishes and beyond was quite notable, quite large. Many homes were flooded and businesses. It was pretty extensive flooding, only to be surpassed by what happened in August that year. So what you're seeing here is some of the rainfall totals that we had from the August 14th. This is massive amounts of rain. This is the white areas that you see here in excess of 20 inches for the whole storm total for that August event. So that's just a summary of that one. Here's the March 10th, 11th event. And as you can see, there's several points that we had in major flood on many rivers in the area. And that is newsworthy in itself. And you can see several broke their records, floods of records, at Bogafly, Boston Street in Covington, as well as up in Folsom, the Chafuncta River in Folsom. And here's some of the pictures that you can see some of the impacts that the people felt out there with this event from all the heavy rainfall that occurred. Then that's only to be outdone by what happened in August 11th through the 13th in the Baton Rouge area. This is the now infamous no-name tropical system. It did not ever get named as formally a tropical storm or depression, but it had all the behaviors of one, and it stayed pretty much over land, so that was a big reason for not naming it. But the circulations and everything did take on an appearance of say, a tropical depression or a tropical storm. And with that, without the wind, really the wind was not much of a factor in this one, but the excessive rainfall, the tropical moisture that just sat over the Baton Rouge, greater Baton Rouge area for several days, really caused quite a bit of rainfall and massive flooding. It lost out roads and bridges throughout the area in the North Shore. It became a big FEMA response for all the thousands of houses and everything that were flooded. Denham Springs was particularly hard hit on the Amite River. So this is a very historic event, and it'll be one that's talked about for a very long time and will be used as the benchmark moving forward as far as big rain events go. And then, of course, the year was also highlighted by the very long, drawn-out major flood on the main stem of the Mississippi River. It started actually in December of 2018 and went well into the year, finally not getting below flood until about late July, along several the lower end of the Mississippi River. But here's a picture from the satellite. You can see the Bonnet Carré Spillway being employed here and fully open at this point, and the flow that goes into Lake Pontchartrain, and all the brown chocolate milk looking water that you see there is the silty water out of the Mississippi River going through Lake Pontchartrain and ultimately into the Gulf of Mexico. So this was deployed. The spillway was actually opened twice in the same year, first in the early spring and then again during the summer. And as was earlier stated, it was the first time it was ever actually opened during a landfalling tropical system, Bonnie in this case. There's a link here, which is a good information point to get. It's the flood history. It dates back to like the 1500s that I put together several years ago, and we keep it up to date as best we can. And it has all the big major flood events that happened on the Mississippi River historically. So spend some time looking at that. It's a good resource. Moving on to the heavy rain event in Pearl River County this year, May 10th. This was a somewhat localized big rain event, but it impacted the upper part of Pearl River County and over into Stone County, which is actually in Mobile's service area. But both offices were dealing with 10 to 16 inches of rain that fell overnight. And this actually caused the Wolf River up in northern part of Pearl River County to go out of its banks rather quickly. It washed out the train bridge that was on there, and as a result, the train derailed when it got to that point, unfortunately, and it was about 28 cars that were derailed in there. It also put water over the interstate, I-55 through there, and it shut the interstate down for quite some time before the floodwaters receded. So this was a big event, and then the runoff that ultimately went downriver for several days after that impacted the communities all the way down to the coast. And that ultimately added some fresh water to exacerbate the situation that was happening on the Mississippi River as well. So it put quite a bit of fresh water in the Mississippi Sound at the same time the Mississippi River and the spillway was doing this. So it really compounded things quite a bit in a dubious way. So also we'd like to add that we had a drought in summer of 2015. That was probably the most significant dry period we had throughout the decade. And locally, it was, for the most part, it was only a severe drought. I would say it wasn't as bad as, say, 2000, where we were in the extreme category then. But at least for 2015 and for this decade, this was the more notable drought period that we had. And then kind of closing things out real quick, we got winter weather. We had an Arctic blast that happened in 2010. That's what we're seeing here is the temperature map from the nation. And you can see a lot of the nation's morning lows were in the teens in the southeast United States, and the lows only got into the mid-30s. So this was one of the more colder events we had during the decade, and it started out the decade in January of 2010. And you can get these weather maps. It's at your convenience, and you get the link is right here for daily weather maps. Just click on that. You can get any day you want to reflect back on if something you're interested in seeing. In 2014, we did have the big event that was known as Snowmageddon. You may remember that's the one that basically hampered or shut down traffic for a couple of days in the Birmingham and Atlanta areas. Based on our interactions with our emergency managers and with the public and the media, we were able to get some prudent actions taken by the local decision makers in our area, and a lot of the schools and businesses and roads were closed ahead of time, and so our impacts were quite minimal leading into this event. So I remember the causeway being closed down for a couple of days, and a lot of the interstate area bridges were closed, and as a result, the impacts locally, other than the inconvenience of having to stay home, was actually quite minimal as far as major impacts to the communication, to traffic and everything around the area. There's a story link right here from the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. They're one of our core partners, and you can read how they reacted to this event and how they conveyed their message to the public. And that's a great interaction that we have with our partners in doing this. And then we go on to 2018. We had the snow event that you can see. This is a clear air satellite imagery. You can see clouds in the Gulf of Mexico on the front itself off the East Coast. But over the United States and over the continental area of the United States, particularly along the Mississippi River, all this white you see here is ground on the snow on the ground. And you can see the swath extends all the way down to almost Lake Pontchartrain. So some of the higher amounts we did have, this was generally 1 to 4 inches in this swath. And the highest amount we had was in Kentwood, Louisiana, upper part of Tangipahoa Parish had 4 inches. So this is the NASA Earth Observation System satellite, and it's a very good utility to have in these cases. And then that pretty much concludes it. This is our information, and get in touch with us if you enjoyed this. We hope you did. Like it and pass it on, and retweet it if you want. We certainly appreciate it. The link is right here on our webpage at the very top. It'll be there for a couple of weeks, and then it'll stay on our website. You can get it from past weather. You can find it there moving beyond say once it falls off the top of the page. So it's there for your interaction. Please visit our webpage. It's full of information that you can use on a daily basis. And then you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. So this is going to conclude this presentation of the Decade Weather in Review. We move into a new decade starting tomorrow. Have a happy, safe, and prosperous 2020. And thanks for watching.